I'm Kiera Morgan. Thanks for joining me on Coffee with Kiera, sponsored by the Human Being in Newport and Lincoln City, serving hot and iced drinks, whatever your pleasure, they've got it. And today I'm super excited to be with County Commissioner Claire Hall. Hi!
Hi! How are
Thanks
you?
so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
So let's get a little caught up on what's going on with the county right now. This is kind of a busy time, isn't it?
Definitely. We have a little bit of a lull in the summer months. I'd say things slow down from about 110 to maybe 80. But, some people take vacations. Some of the meetings get canceled once or twice during the summer. But now it's really going full bore on a lot of projects. Really the county budgeting is almost a year-long process. And I remember when I was much, much younger, I wondered, why do they spend so much time on budgeting? But I realized that's really crucial. It's the process by which, we take all the input from our staff, from the public, we look at what resources we have, and we decide, what services are we going to offer to the people in the following year. But there's always challenges to deal with, but I think my feeling is right now county government is in a good place. And, I love working with my colleagues. Commissioner Hunt, been on board 7 years now. Commissioner Jacobson coming on board this year has been a wonderful addition. I mean, Commissioner Hunt and I are both baby boomers, and Katie, being a millennial, she comes in with a whole different generational perspective. She's smart, she's hardworking, she's got a heart, she sees the big picture, so I'll still love coming to work every day after 15 years doing this.
That's fantastic. So let's talk about some of the things that you're working on. So we were at the ribbon cutting for Grace Wins Haven in Newport. How are things going county-wide as far as homelessness as we head into winter? How are things looking?
Well, I think we're doing better than we've ever done before, but I think we're not doing nearly enough, though good things continue to happen. I'd say 5-10 years ago, the cities really did not see homelessness as their problem. They thought it was up to county, state, or private social service agencies to deal with it. But I think now the realization has come that they do have a stake in helping to manage, reduce, and maybe someday end this problem. The City of Newport's Homelessness Task Force came out with a lot of great ideas, and one thing is for them to be supporting Grace Wins Haven. We have at the county for several years by making the fairgrounds available for their use at no charge.
And are you doing that again this year? Because I know there's occupants.
Right. We have not formalized an agreement yet, but what we're hoping is the animal shelter will be in its temporary headquarters. What is this? This is the end of September, hopefully by late October. And that would clear the exhibition hall, not only for our contract with the Winter Farmers Market, but also with the warming shelter as well. We've told them they can anticipate having the use of the exhibit hall this year, but don't count on it beyond that. And, because probably a year from now, that building will be under demolition, reconstruction, and really part of their long-range vision. And I'm hoping now with the local support and potentially some state support, because now for the very first time, and I've seen this happening in my role on the State Housing Council, there is money being made available specifically for emergency shelters. One city in Southern Oregon is taking an office building, and they're going to keep half of it for offices, but the other half is to generate some ongoing income, but the other half will become an overnight, year-round shelter.
That's phenomenal. And Lincoln City, their homeless program is doing well?
Yeah, I think their warming shelter's doing well. They've recently merged with Chance, a peer support. Chance started out as a peer support organization for people dealing with mental illness and addictions, but they're looking at broadening their missions, and the two of them saw some synergies there. So I think that's very good news for them. And of course, Lincoln City for many years has supported Family Promise to offer housing to homeless families. You know, we still have Samaritan House here in Newport, also the women's shelter. So there is shelter, but you know, frankly, there's not enough of it, and there's not enough permanent, stable, affordable housing either. But I feel like that's starting to change too.
I was just going to say, I know the city of Newport's been working really hard, and as well as Lincoln City, on getting some lower income or workforce housing, some apartments at the north end of Newport. You can't miss construction going on there. And I know Lincoln City has a spot that they're working on, trying to get some apartments and things for families to get those going. Because it is very difficult for folks that, I always say it's a three-legged stool. If you want to have a good economy, you've got to have good jobs, you've got to have affordable housing, and you have to have childcare.
Exactly. It's all interrelated. But I have always told people, housing is economic development. It's child care, supporting families, supporting children's success. You know, and as I'm reading more and more, it is good climate policy, because when you've got people commuting impossible distances simply because they can't afford to live in the community where they work. Well, can I share one story?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that I think is so wonderful on so many levels. Fistera Gardens, another state-funded project, 21 units that opened earlier this year. I got to speak there, the developer, the director of Oregon Housing, but, you know, we weren't the stars. To me, the star was the single mom of a teenager living in Yachats and commuting every day from Five Rivers. Well, folks, if you don't know where Five Rivers is, just imagine going way up in the woods. It's about an hour's drive each way, Five Rivers to Yachats. So she was spending 2 hours a day commuting, seeing very little of her daughter, and now she is in an affordable unit where she can actually walk to work. And
that's so great.
I mean, for families, for the environment, just everything.
That's fantastic. So let's backtrack a little bit. We talked very briefly about that the animals are currently inhabiting some areas of the fairgrounds. Let's do a little bit of a backstory. So the building that the animal shelter has been in has not been in good shape for a long, long time. How old was the building? Do you remember?
Yeah, there's two main segments of it. The largest part was built in the mid-1960s. That was, the concrete block portion, and really that was built as what the 1960s version of a dog pound was. And then a little over 20 years ago, a group of volunteers came in, volunteer labor, they provided the materials, very well-meaning, but they did the addition on the front of the building, which provided the offices and the cat spaces. But unfortunately, right from the start, that addition, as well as the older building, has been a constant maintenance nightmare. I mean, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars we put in patching the roof, had to replace the HVAC system at least once, constant plumbing and electrical nightmares. So.
And this isn't a money-generating facility.
No.
So that made it difficult.
Yeah, and so we knew the time was coming that we would have to replace the building, and even in this year's budget, we set aside $150,000 out of the Animal Services Levy, $150,000 out of General Fund. That's not going to be the whole cost by any means, but at least we thought that would, get us started. We thought we were staying ahead of the maintenance problem, but here's where we made the mistake, unfortunately, because a couple of employees reported severe respiratory problems. We brought in a mold professional. He said the mold was in the walls, in the HVAC system, said the building was not salvageable even on a short-term basis. get people and animals out immediately. So we
Well,
did.
because if it was hard on people, it had to have been hard on the animals.
Yeah.
And no one wants that, of course.
Oh, no.
But it's not like the dog can say, "Hey, I'm having some trouble breathing here."
Exactly,
You know, unless you're Scooby-Doo, and I don't think that's possible.
But but no, I've got to give huge credit to the staff for bearing up under this. Our core of volunteers who have stuck with us through all of that. I know several other shelters throughout the region took on the animals that we did not have the capacity for. So Commissioner Jacobson is part of a task force. They're first evaluating and going to find a site. My understanding is they still haven't ruled out rebuilding on the current site, but they also want to look at other sites.
Question. I
Yeah.
did a story on this,
Yeah.
and when you guys passed that emergency
Right.
budget, and if you haven't been down Harney Street there, the building's gone.
Yep. Torn down
I
last
was
week.
pretty amazed.
Yeah.
Drove by and went, "Oh, wow, it's not there anymore."
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people have asked, why do you need another site? Why not just build it where it's at? Can you answer that?
Some of the things they've talked about for a new shelter that maybe would be desirable, if not absolutely necessary, having capacity for taking in larger animals, like right now, say, for example, I can remember in the last 30 years at least a handful of cases where, unfortunately, deputies have come upon malnourished, mistreated horses, and
Horses,
we
goats.
and so we find places outside the area, maybe to have more exercise space. I mean, my understanding is we could keep it there, but just in terms of due diligence, looking at, that they're thinking, let's explore whether there's a better site, a little more room. Most places you don't find an animal shelter right in the middle of the city. It's more common to find it on the edge of the city. So
looking at that spot, is it financially responsible to put a temporary spot back there and then have to start over from scratch building something else, or what's that going to look like?
well, they were able to save the electrical and plumbing hookups, so that will serve in the interim, however many months this has to be. And then I guess if they do decide to rebuild at that site, they'll have to look at how they work around that. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not sure exactly how that would work,
But we'll keep folks
Yes.
posted as
Yes.
the journey continues
but
for the animal
yeah,
shelter.
I can tell you, I certainly know Commissioner Jacobson is bringing a real sense of urgency to this, saying that, we don't want to rush it in one sense because, the last shelter lasted more than 50 years, and this will probably be the shelter for the next 50 years, so we don't want to unduly rush it, but at the same time, there is an urgency behind this.
All right. So Claire, let's talk a little bit about a fun subject, VRDs.
Oh boy, okay. Yeah.
So
You got a funny idea of fun, Kiera. I know
Right?
you were kidding, but okay.
but it is a hot topic.
Oh, yes.
And it's something that the cities again, and now the county is starting to deal with. And it comes back to housing. It's
Yes.
that catch-22. Folks want to be able to utilize their homes that they have here, even if they have land and they bought, put on a second home on their land that they want to be able to use to generate some extra income for themselves using Airbnbs, etc. But on the flip side of the coin, there needs to be enough housing for the folks, like you said, that live and work here. So where is the county at when it comes to VRDs?
Well, we didn't regulate them at all until 3 years ago, and then we went through a pretty lengthy process, put in place a licensing system and an enforcement system. But really the reason we ended up revisiting it this year, the first thing that came up was the fact we have now, we're still working on a really accurate inventory, but we're thinking we've got, I believe now, in the neighborhood of 590 VRDs, and about half of those are within the unincorporated areas, again, just so people understand Newport, Lincoln City, Yachats, they regulate and license the ones within their area, but this is so for unincorporated Lincoln County. And about half of those are on septic systems, not connected to any sewer system. So we initially thought by putting occupancy limits like on the house, like say a 2-bedroom house, 3 per sleeping unit plus 2 additional, so 8 people total in that case. But we found concerns from some people about the possibility of septics failing in their neighborhoods where they're operating as a VRD. We found that Clatsop County adopted a regulation basically addressing this, requiring a professional inspection. We're finding that the regulation of septic systems has become much tighter as the decades go on, and going back as recently as the 1970s, there was no permit required for a septic, but sometimes people were putting large oil drums in to capture their waste. So if you don't have now a septic, licensed septic person's certification within the last 10 years, you're going to have to get one to continue operating as a VRD. And also, if their judgment of the capacity is less, say that they say this hypothetical home we're talking about should be occupied by no more than 6 people at a time, not
And that's
the 8.
according to
The professional.
according to the professional,
Mhm.
as per for the septic system.
Yes,
What that
that we
septic
would-
system could handle.
That at least in this hypothetical case, we tell the person you can no longer rent to 8 people a night, maximum 6. So that's what we have passed.
How did that go over? You had lots of folks that attended that meeting.
I'd say in a lot of ways.
Because it seems like it makes sense.
Yeah, it did. There was a little bit of grumbling, but most people, most people were supportive of it. I don't think anybody could really sit up there and with a straight face say, no, you shouldn't be protecting neighborhood health and safety. We also tightened up the I tweaked the response requirement on complaints, that we said you had to have a local response number and respond within 1 hour. Now we were finding a lot of people, are using a regional response number, which is fine as long as there's still a response within 1 hour if there's a local contact. So trying to make sure that the responsiveness is there.
And that's mostly to protect neighbors, right?
Right. If
And
somebody,
enforce the rules.
if somebody
Because you never
calls,
know. When you rent to someone, you could
Yeah.
you don't have time to fully vet that person. You just kind of go by their word. And so you don't know if, a gal's going to say, oh, I just want a place for me and my boyfriend to, hang out. And then next thing you know, there's a party with 20 people.
Exactly. And even if they keep to themselves, but if they're shooting off fireworks in the backyard, blasting music at excessive decibel levels, that kind of thing, there needs to be a response. So we passed that a couple of weeks ago. We're calling that phase 1 of this examination. Phase 2 is going to be I think the more challenging one. We've asked staff to come back to us by the end of the year with some regulations. Do we look at any kind of a cap on the total number of VRDs we'll license? And would that be just, say, a numerical number countywide that say, okay, if we've got 590 now, that will go to 650, that's it, no more licenses. If you want a new one, somebody would have to drop theirs and then you could get in line for it. Or could we do neighborhood overlays? Because again, we've done the mapping of the ones we know about, and it probably wouldn't surprise you or most people that probably greater than 90% of them are west of Highway 101, just a few scattered ones east. So, 3 years ago when we did the licensing program, 90% of the complaints were coming from Gleneden Beach, Lincoln Beach. Now, the areas we're hearing from a lot are Morocco, south of Depot Bay, Beverly Beach, and to some extent South Shore, just, in the area
South
of the
Beach area.
South Beach, yeah, kind of in the same neck of the woods as the Newport Airport. So, or
So what
you
would
do-
an overlay?
Well,
can
it
you
might
explain
say,
that?
well, okay, say we've got an inventory of the number of homes. I think, I think there are 54 homes in Morocco, and if I'm quoting incorrectly from memory, it's in that range. Right now, there's 4 VRDs, and perhaps we would say we will allow 5, 6 in Morocco, and no more.
Okay.
To
So
cap
it would
it
go
on a
per
neighborhood.
neighborhood
Yeah,
area.
that's
Okay.
another potential way of doing it. Or, some people have said, and this is the approach the Tillamook County Commissioners have taken for now, even though they've got a significantly higher percentage of rural VRDs than we do, more than 7%. They have decided, at least right now, not to go with a cap, but to try and increase enforcement. So I'm sure all of these ideas will be on the table and probably more, and we'll listen to everybody and try to be
That's
responsive.
what's important is
Yeah.
that you do take people's feedback very seriously.
Right. And unfortunately, it's one of the cases where we probably can't satisfy everyone, because there are probably some people who would like us to do nothing more than just collect the yearly license fee and that's it, and others who would like to see us go, as some places have done, actually outlawing them in residential zones. And the way the law is, cities and counties are different. I mean, we could do a moratorium, say no more in residential zones, and once the property sells, the license dies, but that could take years of attrition if we wanted to go that direction, and I don't know that we would.
All right, and let's talk a little bit about the county commons. Fair was very successful again this
Yes.
year. And it's, as you mentioned, being used, the main exhibit hall is being used by the farmers market,
Yes.
by the animal shelter, by the homeless shelter. So it's getting quite a bit of use. But there's also now, is the plan finally in place?
Yes, we approved it a few weeks ago. The Fair Board approved it. There is an official plan, and we should see actual construction happening sometime in this fiscal year. And there's a lot of confusion, misinformation, but again, if I could just quickly tell people what is going to happen. There's going to be a new exhibition hall, 15,000 square feet, which is about the size of the current one. I imagine, there's no design yet, but probably still concrete floor, metal building, utilitarian, not fancy, maybe some brick facing on it. I don't know. I've seen some where they do that. And just serving the same purposes an exhibition hall always does. The outdoor arena will be covered, and we'll have some additional bleachers, so hopefully that could be useful for more functions. The building where Pick of the Litter is right now will be remodeled into a new permanent home for 4-H. Barns will come down, and there'll be a brand new barn. That's it. Oh, landscaping and parking, but basically that's it.
Now, how is it going to be maintained? Because that's kind of how we got to this in the first place.
We have not officially made this a policy, but I think, it's been our policy ever since over the last decade. But however we permanently restructure things, I think the county will keep responsibility for maintenance of the property. Previously, it was delegated to the Fair Board, and it happened here, it happened in a lot of other counties. I remember a few years ago seeing that Washington County, with almost no notice to the public, was having to tear down 4 buildings on their fairgrounds because, hey, you're staging the fair and you want it to be as great a spectacular affair as it can be. But so then you tend maybe not to think so much about the maintenance. But, but I think that's a big public asset. We cannot let it deteriorate like it has happened. And it was really over decades. It just wasn't overnight. It was just, over decades, just a creeping deterioration.
Now, is the goal to attract other entities to come to Lincoln County and use the commons for their events?
Oh, definitely. They made no commitments, but for instance, the Quilters Guild came to a couple of our meetings and said, they do their show right now at the Newport Rec Center. They say that's really not designed for that kind of an event, and they're starting to outgrow it. They looked at our building as it is now and said, with those uneven floors, with the dust blowing in, no way. But if we built something like, the modern exhibit hall we're talking about, they would probably have a real interest in coming in there. I've heard that, certainly no big name musical acts, but some of the kind of second tier folks that maybe play Eugene or Corvallis might add a coastal stop if they had a nice facility, and again, the Newport Performing Arts Center is wonderful, but what is that? I think 325 seats in the Silverman Theater, so someplace that could maybe hold 600-700 if it had a nice sound system, which is something Fair Board Chair Frank Keltner is advocating for, and I sure would like to see happen. So really a multi-use community space.
All right. Let's see. Claire, is there anything else that you
Gosh.
can think of that you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered?
Those seem like the most pressing topics, and just I had a lot of fun being here, and thank you for the coffee.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining me on Coffee with Kiera. We are sponsored by The Human Bean on Highway 101 and 6th Street in Newport, and in Lincoln City on Highway 101 on the west side of the highway, right before you get to TLC Credit Union. I'm Kiera Morgan for Pacific Northwest News and Entertainment.